Just want to thank the panelists for coming and being a part of what I think is incredibly important, especially as we start talking about budgeting in this state and in this country. In 1967, A. Philip Randolph came up with something he believed would help the entire country. A. Philip Randolph, I don't know if everybody knows who A. Philip Randolph is. If you don't, you should, and blame your history teacher if you don't. Obviously was a civil rights activist and a union organizer, Brotherhood, Sleeping Car Porters and Maids, but he came up with a freedom budget and endorsed by Martin Luther King, by a whole bunch of other folks at the time that thought that they found a way to use the budget, the federal budget, in fact, to make sure that we can deal with some of the ills that took place in society. In the freedom budget, they talked about a guaranteed income. In the freedom budget, they talked about full employment. In the freedom budget, they talked about a whole bunch of things, like getting rid of poverty and making sure everybody had an opportunity to have access to a job. These sound like very, kind of highfalutin ideas, but these folks came up with some real practical budgeting solutions to help the federal government. Obviously, it didn't happen. It failed because it didn't get the support that it needed nationally. But here, and I thought I would just lay that out as a framework as we talk about some things that I think are as far-reaching and creative as some of those ideas are, and talk about some practical ways to use budgeting to get to some of those objectives. So on our panel, we have an incredible group of people. Nicole Rodriguez is with us, New Jersey Policy Perspective, who thinks about all of this stuff. Ryan Haygood, New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, here with us as well. Marilyn Rubin, Rutgers University, here with us, professor here. April DeSimone, Practice of Democracy, and Nisha Thompson from the Participatory Budget Project. So I'll give each one of you a few minutes to introduce who you are, but talk just a little bit about what budgeting for equity means to you. So we'll start from my right and move over to my left.
Can you hear me?
Push.
Oh, it's on? Okay. Hello?
Yeah, it's just not loud.
It's not very loud. If you can't hear me, just shout at me. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Nicole Rodriguez. I am the president of New Jersey Policy Perspective. We are a think tank that focuses on state-level policies that lift up economic, racial, and social justice. And I'm really excited to be talking about equitable budgeting. This is a topic that really sits at the heart of our mission at New Jersey Policy Perspective, or NJPP. And at NJPP, we really view budgets as more than just numbers on a spreadsheet. They're moral documents. They reflect the values and priorities and show what we're willing to invest in our society. And I think, as we know, budgets touch everything from education to transportation to libraries, parks, public safety, healthcare, human services. And they really do shape the world that we live in, which is why it's so critical to think about budgeting through an equity lens. And equity-focused budgeting really ensures that we address the needs of everybody, particularly those who've been underserved or left behind by public policy decision-making. And this is not just about fairness. This is about tackling structural inequality head-on, using budgets as a tool to drive meaningful change. And New Jersey has made really great strides at the state level, which offers lessons for local government. Take programs like the child tax credit or the earned income tax credit. They made a huge difference in lives of families who need extra support. In fact, they were lifelines during the pandemic. We expanded access to affordable housing, which helps close a lot of those critical, or help close those critical gaps And on top of that, we made sure that all kids, regardless of their immigration status, have access to public health programs. And these are great examples of how smart policies can make a real impact. At the same time, we know that municipalities face unique challenges. Municipal budgets are often relied on property taxes and user fees, like court fees, for example, which are regressive. And they can burden lower income or working class families. And many towns don't have, cities and towns don't have the data or the tools to evaluate budgets from an equity standpoint, to evaluate how the budget actually impacts different community members, different sectors of your town. And without clear accountability, even well-meaning efforts can and will fall short. But that said, local governments really are in a unique position to lead the way. You know your communities better than anybody. And by prioritizing investments in areas like affordable housing, public health, and safety, and more, municipalities can really tackle those disparities head on. And we've seen this in Patterson and also in Newark with guaranteed income pilots that really show local initiatives that can directly address inequities at the same time listening to communities, because that's also key. And cities nationwide have also demonstrated, which we will hear more about participatory budgeting and how public engagement can help communities set equity goals and build trust and buy-in. I think right now trust and buy-in is critically important if we want to ensure that every single person in our communities are protected. So while New Jersey's limits on municipal tax policy and reliance on state aid for essential services, combined with the fact that poverty is really concentrated, heavily concentrated in a few major municipalities, this means that an equitable budget simply cannot function without state support. And the state can provide funding, technical assistance, and policy frameworks to help municipalities build that capacity. Restoring equity impact statements, for example, for major budget decisions, much like environmental impact statements, can be really transformative. And additionally, linking state funding to clear equity metrics can ensure that resources are targeted to where it's needed the most. And I'll end with this. Equity-focused budgeting isn't just a goal, it's a strategy for building a more inclusive state. And while municipalities face real challenges, they also have, I just really want to emphasize this, they have the potential to lead in ways with innovative solutions that can respond directly to community needs. And I'll end there.
Thank you. Okay. I'm going to speak directly to the mic.
Good morning. I'm going to try not to sound too much like a professor, but it's hard. I just wanted to start off with sort of the definition of budgeting and equity that I've been using. And by the way, anybody who wants this PowerPoint, just let me know afterwards, and I'll give you my card. And this is the definition that's also used in a lot of the literature on budgeting. Budget equity is a strategy that aims to ensure resources are distributed fairly and to address inequities in government spending. It involves considering equity in the budgeting process. It can help to do many things. It can prioritize equity when making taxing and funding decisions. It can identify opportunities to save money. It can reduce the risk of making racial, ethnic, gender, and other inequities worse, which budgets often do. And it can improve outcome for all community members. I just wanted to look at some of the opportunities and then talk about a few of the challenges. When we talk about the opportunities, all of you know who have worked on budgets that there are different parts of the budget process. The first is when the chief executive, such as the mayor, has to put together a budget. And if the chief executive has equity as a priority, The mayor's budget should discuss how it addresses equity related to race and other characteristics. I know that the mayor is one of the few mayors in the state of New Jersey that does this when he is putting together his budget. The Central Budget Office also has to have a role, and it should provide guidance and instructions to the agencies, because most agencies don't know how to do this. Agencies then should discuss how equity is reflected in their budget requests. Again, this is not being done very much in cities in New Jersey, and equity then should be built into audit and evaluation, and this isn't being done for the most part anywhere in the country. Also, data, as you just mentioned, is very important, and so the city should consider establishing an equity data working group, because you can't talk about equity in budgeting unless you have data on different demographic groups in the municipality or state. You also have continual feedback and training of agencies, and a very important aspect and opportunity is to get the support of organizations outside of government, because there are a lot of these organizations that are pushing for equity but haven't been involved in the governmental process. So those are some of the opportunities throughout the whole budget process, but there are several challenges. One is political considerations, which obviously is a challenge in everything we do. Implementing an equity-based budget may face resistance from stakeholders who perceive it as favoring certain groups over others. And so it leads to political challenges in decision-making. Resource allocation conflicts. Prioritizing different equity goals within a budget can lead to tension and competition between different departments and programs. Data limitations, which I've already discussed. Defining equity measures. What do we mean by equity? How do we know when we've achieved equity? That's another challenge. Complexity in implementation. As complex as the process is, it requires significant coordination and collaboration across departments, which can be time-consuming and challenging. So this is something else that has to be addressed. And finally, the most difficult part, as far as I'm concerned, is monitoring and evaluation. How do you know what the impact is? How do you measure the impact? You have to have data collection and analysis, and in many municipalities, employees are not trained to do this. And so, later when we come back around, I'm going to talk about some of the things that cities throughout the country have done, but all of them have faced these challenges as they have been attempting to incorporate equity into their budget decisions. Thank you.
Sure. Good morning. Good morning. I'm Ryan Haygood. I'm at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. Just want to acknowledge the mayor and his team, Shoshana and Gabrielle, for putting this panel together. Look, it's 9:15, you all, and it's a full room, which speaks both to the leadership of the mayor and to your commitment to these issues. I guess what I'd like to start from is sort of an opportunity perspective, right? So ours is a state that's one of the wealthiest states in the country. I think this year, second only. Is this on? Is this?
No.
No.
It's on, but not on.
Yeah, we just head faking. Yeah, we just head faking. Can you hear us in the back?
Yeah.
Okay. So ours is one of the wealthiest states in the country. I think New Jersey is second only to Maryland this year in terms of its prosperity. We're also one of the most racially diverse states in the country. Now, New Jersey is a majority people of color state. So there's this incredibly rich racial diversity alongside some real prosperity across the state. But it's also true that really rich racial diversity exists alongside some really entrenched racial segregation. We see this in our neighborhoods, in our classrooms, even in the places where we worship. And that prosperity exists alongside some real punishing poverty. And one of the questions is why? And Nicole talks a lot about how part of that is because we've designed our state in that way. And that shows up in the numbers. And we think a lot about the numbers where we do a lot of work around racial disparities and understanding racial disparities and really what the racial disparities reflect. And so I brought some materials for you in the outside. You could take them with you that look at racial disparities, particularly as they impact Black people. which is sort of the heart of the racial justice work that we do. One of those racial disparities shows up in the investments we make in incarcerating our young people. So we've done a lot of work. I see partners in the room and with the mayor to think about how New Jersey can close its youth prisons, move those young people to smaller facilities closer to home that are more therapeutic, and then reinvest the cost savings into the communities from which so many of our young people come. The vast majority of those who are incarcerated are black and brown. So we've done incredible work reducing the youth prison population. But we've continued to fund our youth prisons as if they're at capacity, meaning that though there are about 100 kids who are incarcerated in our 3 youth prisons, they're staffed as if they're at capacity, right? You follow me? And the reason that matters is because we continue to spend in these youth prisons as if they are full of young people. And what that means is we're investing about $660,000 to incarcerate each young person. Right? And that is a policy priority. That's how we've decided. Yeah, folks are like, wait a minute, especially for the educators in the room. So I'll say it again. So we are investing $660,000 to incarcerate each young person. And you could imagine on the subject of budgeting what it might look like were we to invest that number in the future of a young child, right? And so I want to lift up how much of how we look in this state is based on decisions we made that are rooted in policy priorities. That's the challenge. The good news is I think that with vision, we can shift the way we make investments. I think too often, and I'm very mindful of this, Shoshana gave me the 2 minutes, so I'll close with this here. You know, we just had, Mayor Baraka, we just had an election. Well, folks are following it. Look, we're a 501c3, nonpartisan organization. We don't endorse candidates, right? We keep it 501c3, but there have been lots and lots of discussions about how what happened, what occasioned the result. And I'll be really honest, if I can, Mayor Baraka. About 2 weeks before the election, I know I got like a little bit of time left, so I'm almost done. 2 weeks before the election, I was in the kitchen. My wife and a couple of her girlfriends, frankly, they were beating up on us. And by us, I mean black men. And the question was, what are black men gonna do in this election? And I said, black men are going to do what black men always have done in elections. We're going to follow the lead of black women. If the election goes a particular way, it won't be because of black people. And it won't be because of black men in particular. And you all are like, why does that matter? And it matters because right after the election, the very first thing that happened was the question around, so only 78% of black men voted for a particular candidate. Why didn't they turn out at the 92% range as black women? You heard me say that 78% of black men voted a particular way. You don't go to a demographic that gave nearly 80% of his vote and ask why you couldn't get more before going to the majority of voters who cast their vote in a majority way that decided the election. So if I just get really honest as I close, part of what we don't often do is address the real drivers around how we got to the place. And the reason that matters in an election is because if we don't get to the root cause of what drives the inequity in our state, then we'll go to the folks who are doing their level best. In this election, it was black people, and ask, well, what more can black people give to save democracy? When in this particular example, which I'm using as a metaphor, the reason that a candidate lost in this election was not because of black people. It was because the majority of voters voted in a vastly different way to occasion a result. And part of what I think the opportunity is in New Jersey is for us all to have that honest conversation, both around how we got to where we are and what we can do to turn a corner in the opportunity frame. That's my layup.
Good morning, everyone. April D. Simone. I don't know if you can hear me in the back. Great to be here. Thank you for the effort to put this, front and center. My work is in the space of architecture and planning. I'm a managing principal of Practice of Democracy and the People's Studio Practicum. The People's Studio Practicum is a space where we on-ramp this conversation that resonates with what all are going to be saying on this panel. How do we define equity, and how does the currency of equity show up in our day-to-day? When people get up and they go to work or they do their daily routine, as a designer, the first thing what does your housing look like? What does your school look like? What does your salary look like? And when we don't take a transdisciplinary approach to understand that for some of us, and for 8 generations, we've been sold a language of equity, but how it's been exchanged as a currency in what we call a democratic society has fallen short. So the work we do is at the scale of a neighborhood block. We bring people together to understand, when we throw visualizations on the board, how do we amplify and create spheres of impact that when you put a line item in for equity, how is that translating into your lived experience? How are we designing those youth facilities in a way that reinforce a cognitive conditioning of human value versus a punitive space? And participatory budgeting, or what you're going to hear, or policy, we come from entrenched systems. And even in our most progressive spaces, as the election alluded to, are a reflection that we have not addressed redlining. We have not addressed the collateral consequences of urban renewal. As an architect, when I walk in rooms, I'm sitting across from people that are getting multi-million-dollar contracts from cities to develop and build. But they reinforce a narrative that reinforces a hierarchy of human value. It's always affordable housing and poor people here. It's always luxury here. There never has been an attempt to deconstruct the segregated footprint of America. And that takes a lot of work beyond just what a municipal budget can line item. But what it can do is create a sphere of impact. It allows us to do this work on the ground to give C-suite access so that we give a bigger bang for that buck when it comes in. So we create these storefront spaces. We do house talks that really bring in people from all different backgrounds to understand what inequity has looked like, what it looks like today, and what it looks like beyond just land acknowledgements of First Nations people. It's how do we practice equity in the built environment? Because we still live, as you said, in a very hyper-segregated America. We are coming upon the 250th anniversary of American democracy. Equity is a currency, and it's going to define what the next 250 years in this country will look like. And it's going to take all of our agencies to look at why in 2024, I can't get a loan in a place like Trenton to restore people from living in sewage. And that's a democratically led city. So we have to start thinking about what are we satisfied with, and then what is the goal, so that we can actualize life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for everyone. Thank you.
Can everyone hear me? No one from New Jersey needs a microphone.
I'm from the Bronx.
You're honorary. So I'm Nisha Thompson with Participatory Budgeting Project. I'm the New Jersey Advocacy Manager. I'm not going to say all of that because it's too early in the morning, so PB for short. And we are an organization that helps people advocate for PB in their local community. We do technical assistance, and we also do research on how effective participatory budgeting is. The New Jersey work, funded by Robert Wood Johnson and the New Jersey team, thank you, Marco, ran a learning cohort this past fall to actually work with people on the ground and teach them what participatory budgeting is. And the reason why our learning cohort is important, why PVP wants to do it, is because we ground PB in equity. And if it's not grounded in equity, it isn't good PB. And that's what we've decided. And you can do participatory budgeting however you like, or whatever is the least resistance, whatever you want to do. But if you're doing it and we are helping you, it's grounded in equity. There is a lovely handout with the cycle that you can get on the way out, or from me. I'm not going to go into the details of the cycle, but basically it is people from the community making the rules of how money is spent. The money is real. It is given, we have seen government funds, federal funds, we've seen discretionary funds, and then people from that community come together and they say, who can vote? An 11-year-old, great. A non-documented worker, great. Whoever comes into the neighborhood, great. You could vote. You could submit an idea. You could do whatever. A 6-year-old walks up, says, I want a basketball court. That's an idea. You get to submit it. Then the people come together from that community and they work through those ideas and create actual proposals. They work with the government. They look at feasibility. No, we cannot fill every pothole. Nobody knows why. No one knows why the potholes can't get filled. It is a mystery, but we can't do it. And so that's not on the table, but we are going to build proposals, and then those proposals go back to the community votes. And that's the basic level of the cycle. But what we are here to talk about in terms of equity and how you build equity through participation. This is a budgeting panel, but equity is more than just money and resources. It's trust. We deserve to be a community again. We deserve to trust each other again. We deserve to show up in a room and say, you don't have shoes, we're gonna get you shoes. I see what you need, you are part of our community, and that means something. And participatory budgeting is a process. Inequity, creating inequity was a process, creating equity is a process. There's no shortcuts, there's no magic. There's no magical pots of money that are gonna create that. And you build trust with each other. A lot of the projects that we have helped when centering equity look at things like repair zones. Rhode Island did health equity zones. LA did repair zones where they define areas by inequity. Redlining, they design it by COVID cases, poverty rates. Durham, North Carolina did how many people take public transport to work, because that's a driving state. They got one bus in North Carolina, and if you're taking it, then you deserve to have a bigger seat at the table, and that's what they're doing to define equity in those spaces. They're working with the government to do that. So specificity on what inequity means to your community, what the history of that is really an important part of creating the steering committee for participatory budgeting, for being able to look at how people are represented, who gets to do the work. And it creates this trust between government. Freehold New Jersey has been doing it for 8 years. There's this is the best civic engagement. The Mayor Kane will always say, this is the best civic engagement process we've ever been able to. People are coming up, people just show up at my house and they say, I want this and I want that. And they say, go do participatory budgeting. Show up for us, and then you can get that. And I think that is really where the equity comes in. You have to be willing to give up control over this money, because it's not about, I'm going to do more for you in a policy perspective. Okay, fine, we don't know what to do. Here's the money. Here is the money, you all figure it out. And this process allows a lot of people to come together. Facilitation is really important. Conflict resolution is very important. We have to have these conversations with each other. We have to move beyond scarcity mindset. And while this process isn't perfect, it is a container for these things. It is not always about how you spend the money, but you're giving people the option to decide how to spend that money. You're giving them that ability, and that's what we are pushing for participatory budgeting. That's why it is a first step in learning how to be a community again. It's a first step to overcoming inequity together, and that's what our work is, and that's my time, I think.
Thank you, thank you. So I want to go back to Nicole, just really talk about some budget-focused equity kind of frameworks, and maybe some templates as well that can help us, talk about what equity looks like in budgeting, in the budget process.
Sure. So municipalities can start by embedding equity considerations at every stage of the budgeting process. I think we've alluded to this on this panel. And what Nisha is really talking about is, it begins with engaging the community. Residents, particularly those in underserved groups, and they're underserved because of public policy decisions, need a seat at the table, because they're often left behind in the budget, they're often not focused in the budget, they're often underfunded in the budget. And if we care about affordability as a state, as many folks, particularly lawmakers, have emphasized, then we gotta put our money where our mouth is. So municipalities can use equity impact assessments to evaluate how proposed spending decisions will affect particular sectors of the community. These assessments can ensure that resources are targeted more effectively and don't unintentionally, and this is the evaluation part too, don't unintentionally harm particular or widen disparities that already exist. So it's something that it needs constant care. And, you know, things that we think about that we, you know, some tools that I think are additionally helpful is data and analysis. Like at NJPP, we disaggregate data and so that we can understand the impact or even where investments should be targeted. Training and technical assistance. The state can provide training and technical assistance. Our team, Nisha, like Ryan, all of us can offer resources to help local leaders build equity, focused budgeting practices, and advocacy and policy support, because it really does, we do need this collaboration with the state, and working with the state to create these frameworks and incentives that encourage municipalities to adopt equity focused budgeting practices, because at the same time, these sort of practices require funding, they require manpower, so we need to work together, and it has to be a mutual investment in each other in our communities. And with that, we can align local budgets with broader equity goals and help ensure that we meet every unique challenge that we see in our communities.
Right. So I'll move on to Maryland. Just based on your research, just some of the initiatives that happened across the country that cities implemented to make sure they had an equity focused budget, and you know, some lessons that we can learn in New Jersey from those.
I don't know what happened to,
You want to bring the mic back?
It's not on, I don't think.
No.
yeah, I don't know what happened to it. To change the slide.
On the slides.
Yeah.
You can use this.
Is this it?
No, next.
There you go.
Thank you.
There you go.
You want to come up here? The microphone or?
Yeah. You want let me see. I don't know if it really is going to matter, but
Well, maybe it won't matter. Thank you. There are, it's really interesting because cities have really been in the lead in trying to use equity in their budgets much more than states. And so I'm just going to give a few examples, and I have the URLs, and again, if you want this PowerPoint, just let me know and I'll send it to you. One of the cities that's doing this, that's quoted all over, is Austin, Texas. Austin, Texas was one of the most segregated cities in the country, and one of the things they decided was that to try to address these inequities and the segregation, they would use their budget. And so they established an equity assessment tool that was designed to identify and remedy inequitable policies, practices, and procedures. And the tool has a special section that's focused on budget analysis that asks every department how their budgets may disproportionately benefit communities and how it could be reallocated to advance racial equity. And there were departments that fought this tooth and nail, but the city council is forcing them to do it, much more so than the mayor in that case. Next slide, please. Another city that's doing something like this is Madison, Wisconsin. And it created what it calls a racial equity and social justice tool to facilitate conscious consideration of equity. And the tool is used by the finance department and asks, again, every agency in the city, what, who, why, and how, about who is being affected by the budget, and how marginalized populations can be brought more into the process and benefit more from the spending and taxing decisions of the city. Another city, the next slide please. Another city that's doing this is Portland, Oregon. And I was thinking, Ryan, when you were speaking about the political nature of some of these places, they're not all the same, which is interesting. In Portland, they integrated a budget equity assessment tool into the budget proposal requirement. So every agency that submits a budget proposal to the city central budget office has to discuss how its proposal is going to impact equity. And to do this, it needs data, and that's been a challenge for them. And again, it's a set of questions to guide the city departments as to looking at how budget allocations benefit or burden communities, especially indigenous people, black people, immigrants, and refugees, which was interesting. This is the language from the city, and people with disabilities. And so Portland has been going a step further than other places and saying, when we talk about equity, we're not only talking about racial equity, but we're talking about other types of equity as well. And again, you can get more information from what Portland is doing from the URL. The other city I want to talk a little bit about is Philadelphia. Philadelphia is in the lead right now in using equity in its budget process. And it uses 5 strategies to advance equity in budgeting. The first is participatory budgeting, which you've already heard about. The second is external input. So there are various task forces that have been set up by the city to look at different parts of the budget and how the budget is having an impact on the inequities that exist in the city. A third is internal processes. The city is convening departments to work together, not in sort of stovepipe fashion, and say, how is everything we're doing impacting equity in the city? And then they're looking predominantly at racial equity, but not only racial equity. Then they have impact and data analysis. Again, as you've heard from Nicole, a very important part of trying to use equity and of trying to look at the impact of the budget decisions that the cities are actually making. And then they have, and this is to me the most interesting part of Philadelphia, action plans. At the federal level, President Biden has required that every agency submit an action plan showing what it's done in the past, how the actions in the past have impacted equity, and then how can we take actions to change this in the future. And so every single agency in Philadelphia is doing this. This has been in place for a couple of years, and there was an election in Philadelphia last year, and the new mayor is continuing where the exiting mayor left off. So this isn't just sort of a flavor of the day. What they're doing is they're trying to incorporate this into the very basics of what the city does. And the city, and this is something that you all might want to look at if you're actually thinking of doing this, it's the city has created equity rubrics to evaluate departmental budgets. Because in a lot of cities, one of the problems has been that cities say, this is what we're going to do, and then they never do it. And so the city of Philadelphia is saying, we are actually going to look at what you're doing, and you're going to have to tell us when you put together your proposals, not only what you want to do, but how you want to know whether or not you've done it. And so Philadelphia is really an interesting model, and the people in Philadelphia are very cooperative. If anybody wanted to hear from them, they're willing to speak with you and tell you what they've been doing and how successful they have been. And so one of the other things that I was just asked to look at is how do you speak to academic institutions in supporting all of these activities? Well, I have taught budgeting in government for more years than I care to admit. And I was one of the few people I knew who ever used the word equity in the class. Because you can teach government budgeting about how you make budgets, how the mayor puts together a budget, how budgets are evaluated, and you can never use the word equity. And so that's one of the things in academic institutions. We're trying to get people to say, you know what, you can't only teach the mechanics of budgeting, you have to teach who's impacted by the budgets. So that is, I think, how we can incorporate equity into what academics do when they're talking about budgets. Thank you.
Thank you. So Brian, what are from your perspective, most pressing equity issues in New Jersey that could benefit from an equity-driven budget?
Yeah, appreciate the question. I mean, I think a lot about wealth. You know, we started by talking about how New Jersey is one of the wealthiest states in the country. You know, ours is not a challenge of resources. To the extent that folks don't have access to wealth, that is a policy priority. That's a policy decision. You know, we have in this state an incredibly stark racial wealth gap, such that the median net wealth for white families is $322,000. That's among the highest in the country. The median net wealth for black families is $17,700, a $300,000 racial wealth gap. That's a policy decision. So I want to just submit to you, there's some material I shared for you outside. My colleague Harbani recently wrote a report that looks at sort of how wealth is concentrated county by county. So I want to lift up really briefly and then get to the mayor's question. My own county of Essex County. And in Essex County, Harbani wrote that there are 20,000 more black households than white households, right? Essex County, 20,000 more black households than white households, which she describes Essex County as being a majority black and Latino county. Then she says, yet there are more white homeowning households in Essex County than black and Latina or Latino homeowning households together, right? Even though there are 20,000 more black households and white households in Essex County, white households outnumber both black and Latino households together. And I lift that up because, to the mayor's question, the primary driver, as we know, of wealth in this country and in the state is home ownership. And very often, to April's point, when we talk about the way we organize our cities and our communities, we talk a lot about affordable housing. And I'm not diminishing the need for affordable housing, but affordable housing presupposes poverty. And affordable housing essentially means that as cities begin to flourish economically, how do we protect the ability of folks who've been there for a while to stay there as renters? And you can't build wealth in a society where the primary driver of wealth is home ownership when you are disconnected from access to owning a home. And it's hard to overstate the significance of home ownership in this state and in this country more broadly, which is why some of the work we've done together and with the mayor around home ownership has been so important. And they're important first steps. So we work together to champion a bill that provides up to $25,000 of down payment assistance for first time and first generation home buyers. And a lot of folks have used that. It's an important step in the right direction. We've also done a lot of work around combating discriminatory home appraisals. This is a phenomenon folks are familiar with, see people nodding their heads, where homes are too often in communities like ours undervalued, right? And makes it difficult to sell them and to realize the real value of the home. And then I think at the more local level, a lot of creative work the mayor's leading around how do you reimagine how we use Section 8 vouchers? And can you use a Section 8 voucher to turn it into an ability to purchase a home to begin to build equity, or some of the work that April does around land banking? The good news is, I mean, this is the opportunity. I always want to lead from this place of opportunity, even in view of the challenges, is that where there is an imagination and a commitment to make those investments, they're made. And where there isn't, then the communities very often look like do. And part of that begins with an understanding of both how we got here and a commitment to make the investments to turn the corner on the reality that we've built and to build a new one.
So how can participatory budgeting directly impact equity outcomes for residents?
That's a really great question. So participatory budgeting, when done with an equity mindset, allows people to really get involved in the process of looking at what they need and then deciding for themselves what they need. So there's a lot of really good examples. For instance, in Rochester, they did a process for poverty alleviation. And they actually created affordable housing. They created a small homes, tiny houses, tiny house project in order to get housing for people right away. In Denver, currently there's a process where it's just people affected who have survived drug addiction. And they are the ones who are designing the process for their own interventions. And so they are just involved and understand the money and are building that, work to do the things they need. They're not asking people for things. They are just coming together and making decisions together on what they need. And they are in charge of that. People who have survived drug addiction are the ones making the rules and doing what they need to do. I have a couple of examples of some interesting specifics. New York City has been doing participatory budgeting for years now. They have a ton of examples. One of them recently is like, a woman really wanted a dog park. She was like, I need a dog park. So she went into the participatory budgeting process. She became a proposal developer, and in that she was assigned randomly. New York does something called sortition, so you don't work on your project, you work on some random project. And then she learned that there was a bigger problem, that men don't have changing tables in restrooms, in men's restrooms in parks. And so she actually turned on her dog. She was like, I don't need a dog park. You need changing stations for your babies in these parks. And she changed her mind through this process. In North Carolina, they wanted a basketball court. That won like a lot of like votes, but they actually went into the community that was going to be affected. They're like, do you need a basketball court? They're like, we have a basketball court, but there's no lights or security cameras, so no one uses it.
Right.
So they got rid of the basketball court, and the new project became lights and security cameras and like making it nicer so people have access to. In Phoenix, Arizona, Union Schools, they built them a shade, I don't know what happens in hot states, a shade thing, and no one used it because they put it somewhere none of the kids know. So through the participatory budgeting process, they built a new place where they actually use it, and now it's used all the time, and they love it. So it is a process of saying, what do you need? You're in charge of the thing you need. And that helps build a process to deal with, inequity issues, right? Because you are in charge of this money. You get to decide where it goes, what it does. The community you are a part of works together to fix something. We work together to fix a problem together. And when you base it in equity, that means you are deciding that there's people who need to be in charge of something. They need those choices. Inequity means these people have never had a choice. You're giving them things and expecting them to say thank you for stuff that they don't necessarily want. And you're like, you're wasting money, and then you're like, give us the money, and we will do something. So that's how participatory budgeting has been used.
So, April, just in what ways can budgets be structured to address long-standing inequity in urban and underserved communities?
I think that, we have to start with a value proposition that all communities are affected when one community suffers from generational disparities. And we need to line item in a way that allows for amplification and, again, a multiplier effect. That means, Mayor, if you put in a line item to have a public studio space to have these discussions, how does that leverage other resources from philanthropic communities, from the state and the federal level, that allows them the work to continue as political landscapes shift? Because we can have all of this great equity but we know that they're even pushing forward now a bill that will shut down nonprofits that talk about racial inequity. If we do not have a plan B that steps outside of just the governing body or agency, then it seems that it's always going to be contingent on that, and that shifts. We saw CDBG money shift. I think that what we're getting at here is that, to the point that long-standing isn't just 10 years, 20 years ago. It's been since the first boats landed on this continent. The violence around land, the violence around acquisition, political identity has created enormous disparities. I highly recommend all of you, if you have an opportunity, to read The Great Wealth Transference from the Urban Institute. We are now in the position where $83 trillion that was built off of policies like New Deal policies that enabled home ownership. Think about that. $83 trillion is going to be transferred to a next generation that the empathy and the consciousness of equity is compromised. The bootstrap mentality is still there. And that if I can do it, you can do it. And we know that's not the reality on the ground. We need more education. How many of you have seen the Undesign the Red Line exhibition? I curated that exhibition. I created it as a talking point to bring different people in a room so that when they saw that people who were put in positions of authority to steward the ideologies and principles of democracy were reinforcing a psychological dynamic that is pervasive today that says who is deserving of equity and who isn't. And we need that education because it's not happening in our classrooms. So when we design policy, investments, we do it from a disparity perspective. To your point, we reinforce the spatial footprint of segregation, both mentally and physically in the built environment. So we have to have more awareness of how we got here so that we can then properly execute. And again, I think that there is a multiplier effect, and we need to begin to restitch the social fabric of our community. It's not red versus blue, because we're all gonna lose if the consciousness of democracy is wiped out.
I want to pose a kind of a real question that is facing us in the state now in terms of budget inequity. Right now the state did a disparity study, and it showed that less than 1% of all the procurement dollars go to Black, brown, and women-owned businesses, right? In the state of New Jersey, less than 1%. And that's his county that he said is majority Black and brown, less than 1/2 of 1%. So 0.33% of procurement dollars go towards Black, brown, and women businesses in the county of Essex, which makes it 10 times worse than the state of New Jersey. I mean, how could that practically be addressed with some of the things that we're talking about? Like, how could that be dealt with or turned in another direction? Anybody could jump in on that.
I'll take a stab. One of the things is that, and if you want to think of the budget process itself, that when the budget is being put together, the chief executive can make a statement saying that there's going to be X amount of dollars and can set a framework for that. But I think one of the problems, certainly that I've run into through the years, is that a lot of business people don't know how to put in proposals. And so there could be something also in the budget that offers training, and you could work with academic institutions and ask, how do you do this? Because there are a lot of these big contracts go to big companies that have whole staffs that do this. And so I think part of it is training, part of it is acknowledgement by the government that it has to do something to encourage this, and not only saying we have a set aside, but really proactively help people put in proposals to get this money.
And a lot of I think this problem goes deeper. As a Latina woman, I've been, especially in many states, I've worked in different states, and when I participate in democracy, when I talk to lawmakers around budgeting, I am not always welcome. People who have the expertise and understand the communities the most, expertise of their own experience and what their communities need, they're not taking us seriously. So part of this is we really need to think about transparency and accountability. Accountability from lawmakers to their communities, not just particular people who may, like in New Jersey, the line. We were able to dismantle that huge thing that really created inequity in the State House. And in our, we see mostly white people who are elected officials. That's not just happens to happen. Like, that is done purposely. So part of it is we need more teeth in accountability, in transparency, and what happens when we don't do that? Because even at the state level, we have a giant budget, $57 billion that is received by lawmakers sometimes 15 minutes before they vote on it. They have no idea what they're voting on.
That's true.
How are we supposed to tackle equity when our process is broken? So starting at how this is actually formulated is going to be critically important, in addition to all the tools that that we can impose around ensuring that the dollars are actually going to communities that need it the most, and that we're equitable in terms of the outcomes that we see once we put those investments in community. Because if you do any study, I've been in research for a very long time, you put money where people need it, outcomes are better. Like, plain and simple. So we need more courage from lawmakers, and also we need to figure out how to build better bridges to community members so that they feel like this is their space. Because the State House, the mayor's office should be a place where we feel comfortable saying what we need.
Bob? Yep.
Yeah, I mean, there's this. I love the question because I think it gets to the heart of this discussion. Very often, when that question is asked, someone will say, "Well, the challenge is that there aren't enough Black contractors, Black businesses who can receive these contracts, and so the strategy then is to invest in building up Black businesses so they can be in a position to compete for the dollars from the state." But the real question is, why aren't there? Because Black folks are doing this work. The question is, why aren't they positioned to receive the dollars? And this just requires a real moment of honesty, and that's because we've designed it that way. And I mean that with all sincerity. Nicole mentioned the line. I just want to say a quick word because I think the line helps to answer that question. So New Jersey, it's beautiful. Like, I want to opportunity frame it all. Beautiful, diverse, prosperous. There's also no other state like New Jersey. So for you all who were here last year, you might remember we have a neighbor, Safanya Searcy. Safanya Searcy went on Facebook. She made this really sharp critique of the line. And I know because I heard there was a literal buzz. Folks were talking about there was a sister who made this critique about the line, and the way the line works, for those of you who are feigning ignorance, is the line was a design of our primary ballots. It was a line on our primary ballots, and the way it works is when you go to vote, the party's preferred candidates were across the line. It was called line. Very often, vote line A all the way. You remember that. Some of y'all are still feigning ignorance. This is an important point, though. And so the way the line works is that the parties would get together, and it was mostly the county party chairs, mostly white men, and they would pick their candidates. And those candidates would get preferred placement on the ballot, such that preferred candidates never lost an election. They never lost. And so the way it works was the election was essentially decided before a single vote was cast. Real talk. There was no other state in America that used the line, and the line existed forever. And not us in this room, but everybody else outside of it were complicit in the line. We all knew it was foul. We knew it was foul, but we try to find a way to use it to our advantage if we're running for office or if we're supporting someone we like. Very often, though, if you wanted to run, you weren't going to run unless you could get the line support, because it was a fait accompli. The line. The line was designed to constrain democracy, mostly to the advantage of white men, which is why our legislature is overwhelmingly white men. And if we keep it a buck, it's also the reason why our state has always been controlled by white men. It's segregated at the top now, and it will always be until we break it up. So we have a white governor, a white Senate president, and a white assembly leader, right? 3 white men. It's segregated at the top because it was designed that way. So back to Safanya. Safanya did this Facebook post, almost done on Mayor Broccoli. I'm getting there. Because this is ironic we're having this conversation, because this was last year. She did this Facebook post on her Facebook page, obviously, and she was critical both of the line, and if we keep it a buck, how the governor, there was a vacancy for the Senate seat. And the governor decided that his wife was going to run for the seat. And she was going to get what, you all? The line. which means she was going to be the next U.S. This is not a critique of her, but it was a foul practice. And those folks at the league, not you all, but folks outside of it, we knew it was foul. But not y'all, but other folks out there whispering, oh, that's foul. That's so foul. But nobody was willing, which is why Stefania's Facebook post went viral. And through a series of other things, a litigation brought by some courageous lawyers and a candidate who brought the line fell down. And now comes a question for New Jersey lawmakers, what will the ballot look like? And you won't be surprised to know that they're trying to do their level best to design a new ballot, which kind of is inspired by, Tanisha, looks like the line. And so the question for us in this room, just to keep it real, is what are y'all gonna do? Are we gonna, not y'all, but folks, we outside the room, are we gonna whisper about Stefania's Facebook post, or are we gonna ask questions around how does democracy really work now that the line is fallen? And why is it that so few black folks get access to the resources, the vast resources of this country? Last thing I'll say, Mayor, really promise, is that this federal election no doubt influences how our state elected officials will respond. Mobb Deep, famous hip hop group, has a song called Shook Ones. And I promise you, and if you don't know that, you need to stop. Shook Ones. And I promise you a goodly, as black folks say in church, a goodly number of state elected officials are gonna be shook. But they can only be shook if you all allow them to be shook. And part of our charge is to tell them, look, there's a response to the federal election that looks like equity. It looks like democracy inclusion. It looks like what the people want, not what those folks who constructed and now deconstructed line wanted. I'm done, Mayor Brown.
Anybody else want to respond?
I think with procurement specifically,
Right.
you know, you mentioned, down payments, $25,000 for a new homeowner, first-time homeowner. I think we have to expand our mindset
Right.
because the racial wealth gap is just continually growing. I think it's how does procurement align with values? So when you have a developer come to the table, how is the developer creating practices that create land trusts in your state that protect local residential and commercial assets from speculative markets? It's not that speculation and investment is not fair, but we all know we have so much data that already shows that when investment comes in, we're funding through public subsidies the demise and displacement of people who have historically been on the front line. So how do we align with values with the procurement process and create and support and give points to people who say, hey, I want to develop, but I want to develop cooperative models in your state. I want to develop cooperative models that allow housing affordability in perpetuity. I want to support shared equity housing. It's almost astonishing to me watching, again, whether it's Patterson and other cities across the state, that land banking has not been a more prolific practice because land is rooted in all the issues that we're talking about as a property value. But yet when you ask, well, what are you doing to either bank or invest in procurement or developers that are willing to come in and not be extractive, we don't support that type of thinking. So procurement around how we develop and plan our cities, particularly through architecture and planning, becomes an incredible strategy on long-term impact for equity. Because I'm from New York. I'm from the Bronx. I grew up in an area where 90% of my housing stock was rubble. It was what Newark was too. I cannot live in my community despite it still being one of the most poorest congressional districts in this country. Because everyone who came in with the poverty pimping narrative of building affordable housing or low-income housing. You put all these massive developments that raise property values and taxes, and who do you think absorbs that? The renter. We've created a nation of renters, not owners. And we have created land that is not accessible. So the house I grew up in is now $1 million in the poorest district, one of the poorest districts in this nation. Because the investment and the procurement of who got that money to develop was more about, I'm gonna live in Alpine, New Jersey, while I collect rent on what I own. And all of you should be incensed by that.
Except if you live in Alpine, New Jersey.
I'm just gonna add real quick, I worked in government transparency before PB, and like, you know, government contracting is how people make money, hire their friends, do all the things to do, campaign finance reform, like all of the things are government contracting. There's no market, it's not real, so like there's all these structural things that like are huge decisions, require incredible amount of energy to just destroy in order to rebuild. And we should look at that, yes, but there's this world of participatory democracy where you can make your own rules at a very distinct local level about who gets this money and how they implement it and apply. And that involves like stretching things about like what is good, what is bad, what's regulation, what is this, because you want to go up against the contractors, okay, you better be ready. Like that's how they make their money, that's how they hire their friends, that's how they do everything. It is a racket from the top to the bottom. So, you know, the bravery has to be there, like Ryan said, but you know, there's also other ways we can build institutions with each other so that this money can go into the hands of local people who know how to build stuff. And that's like great too. So we need to be creative. We need to be brave and courageous at the top level, but we also need to be creative at the local level. And willing to really just kind of be like, I don't care, we're gonna get it done the way we need to.
So I want to open it up to the floor. I do want to say, just to take us back to the beginning, there's a United Way did a study called the Alice Report, Asset Limited, Income Constrained but Employed. Meaning these are people who have jobs, they have assets, maybe a home, a business, so they have some assets, but they're limited assets. And it's constrained, right? So they are struggling in New Jersey. This is New Jersey's report. 37%, which is more than a third, of white families in New Jersey are struggling. More than a third. People with jobs, with assets, they're struggling. 37% is a big number, right? 52% of African American families, and 51% of Latino families. And when it goes from county to county, it becomes more perverse, right? In some counties, almost half of the entire county, or more than half of the entire county, fits in that category. So the further you go south, all the way down, Gloucester, Cumberland, more than half of the county is struggling. So a budget process that kind of responds to that, a budget process and budget spending that responds to people struggling across racial boundaries, also shows a deep inequity in the state in a different way as well. So I just wanted to put that out there before folks ask questions that they may have. So all the way in the back. Yep.
I'm from Philly, so I shouldn't need one, but
Well, welcome to New Jersey, sir.
I'm actually I'm John Feline. I'm from the Fiscal Justice Research and Investment Firm Activist, and I'm actually from Durham, North Carolina, where I was the data partner for the first 2 rounds of PB, and also a data partner for the City's Budget Office in their Capital Improvement Racial Equity Analysis. So I feel really welcomed by the knowledge you all brought to us this morning. Thank you. I'm, in my work and myself, I'm very concerned for how we can use the public dimensions of our economy to solve root cause problems. And I have 2 questions for this beautiful room this morning. And the first one of them is, how can we turn the small scale and short-term basic income investments that we're making in permanent line items that really live in our space and are part of how we practice and end economic insecurity and poverty. Second is, how do we create longer-term budget goals in this public trust? that change our culture and our structures in a way so that we have 50% of our budget maybe is for public health and housing security, and that is our perspective on public safety instead of the other version of it. So I just think those questions, I think that those are kind of getting us to structural change in some ways. Some of it can be fast, some of it's longer, and I'd love to be in that conversation with y'all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Anybody? Jump in.
Great question.
It is. Do we want to get a few questions or do we want to?
No, jump in.
Oh, no, okay.
Everybody's being modest up here, you know?
Don't talk at once.
I think there are a couple of tools. People's budgets experiments have been going around, citizen assemblies, when people actually get together and decide their priorities. There's one like event that we have done in the past where everyone gets $20 and the baskets are like, you know, like parks, health, police, whatever, and then you just go around and you put your money in whatever basket you want. I think it was North Carolina where the police basket was empty. So like there's like a lot of ways to look at how people want to actually do the budget themselves and see what their priorities are, you know, and have that conversation.
Can I say something?
Yes.
But I think it gets to the root of what we were talking today, that when budgets are put together, for the most part, nobody thinks about equity. Budgets are put together and equity is kind of an afterthought. It doesn't start at the top. You know, the mayor has talked about, and he and I spoke about this, about equity, and I said it's not only equity for people, but it's how business are treated. It's what kind of businesses are getting contracts from the city. So it goes back to the whole budget process itself and trying to get people who are making budgets to say, we have to put equity in here. And unless that happens, I don't think it's ever gonna happen.
And in addition to that, it's just like our there's several things. The structure in which that, you know, a lot of our lawmakers, particularly at the State House, view their job as a lifelong profession. It is not. You're supposed to serve the community, and if you're not, you should be voted out. But we have all these systems that enable people, not necessarily the best actors, to continue to lead on these decisions, and that are short-sighted because they want to be in this position for a very long time. And that's why it's a real struggle to get the long-term priorities because of the way the system is set up. So that's really about accountability and like what kind of teeth can we create in public policy so that we can ensure some sort of at least boundaries so that equity can be focused and not ignored because of an election cycle.
Does anybody else have any questions? But we're going to shut this down. So I would tell you to get in the line if you do. Maybe two more, whatever. I would tell you to get in this line. We're going to ask them all and let them respond to them collectively. So go ahead.
Good morning, Mayor Bronca. Thank you to the panelists, great panel. I just wanted to ask, how do we close the gap talking about equity regarding our returning residents? More specifically, those men and women being released from prison who do not return to their towns of origin, but they may return to towns that have the resources like the great city of York. How do we close those gaps?
Ma'am, you want to ask your question? No. Thank you.
I'm actually going to start with Romans 12:2.
Mm-hmm.
Do not be conformed to the patterns of this world, and start with the renewing of your mind. So I'm listening to everything, and there's a lot of answers that we choose, right? That's actually two. Have an option in front of you and decide which one do we start with. But I think it's important to say that irrespective of numbers and data, all of that still starts with the person implementing the numbers and data. And so it's going to take a transformation of the mind and the heart. Everything each of you said was true, but it doesn't change the fact that the mayor, the council person, whoever is setting that budget, has to start with who they are. And so I think we really want to make sure that we are continuing to start the narrative, continuing the narrative, but training that up from the very beginning. It's not placing blame, but it is acknowledging where we are, how we got there, and then deciding that we're going to work both sides. We're gonna work long-term and short-term. You can't do one or the other. You have to do both.
Right.
You've gotta dismantle what the past has led us to. We have to dismantle that. And that doesn't mean we're going to shift wealth. I don't mean that. I mean understanding how we got there so we don't let that happen again. But then in the short term, we've got to make some adjustments. We do have to share, and we have to be mindful and cognizant that the decisions we're making right now are going to have impacts far beyond us, right? And so each of us right now today, we can determine how we show up. We can determine whether or not we give space to the people in our sphere, right? We all have a mission. Our mission field is our distinct sphere of influence, is our centers of influence. And so we have to start there. Everybody that's in this room, we've heard the same message. How we walk out of this room determines how we move forward. Because each one of us taking this home, we amplify it by what we do. And so I don't have all the answers, but I want to be a part of the solution. So I'd like to connect with you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Come on. Next.
Oh, sorry. Monica Van Pelt,
Okay.
born and raised in Newark.
That's awesome.
How you doing? Brian Evans, CEO of the Father Son of New Jersey, headquartered in Trenton, New Jersey. We do a lot of work around fatherhood work, equity building around fathers, particularly in underserved communities. My question is, there seems to be have been an erosion of equity on a national scale. I mean, equity was removed from DEI. I'm wondering how, in your view, how do you see that trickles down to the state level, to the county level, city level, and what are some mechanisms and things that we can do to kind of, get equity back to where it should be?
All right, y'all jump in those questions briefly.
Let's go.
We got another panel waiting to get in here. Go ahead.
On closing the gaps on returning citizens, which is also a personal and near and dear issue. I have family members who have returned, and it's a hot mess. They're not set up for success. Even getting your ID is a hassle. Sometimes you can't even do that. And then getting into housing. And then if you have children and your child support, contract is still going on, and then you owe all that in arrears. So you really come out of prison or jail in a deficit, in many different ways. And there's so many amazing support groups who are not funded, who should be funded by the state because they're actually putting people on accessing public services that they're eligible for, so that they can start building a base to be able to afford the basics. And we're just talking about the basics. And it starts even before that. How are we engaging in public safety in our communities? How are we, the great work that I've seen around the state around having community members go to address a safety issue first rather than involving the police, so they don't have to go into that pipeline. And that's actually starting to be funded through the state. And we need to do the same thing for after, because we created this, particularly the war on drugs where we over-incarcerated many Black and brown people, especially in this state. How do we serve those folks who have been also, regardless of whether they deserve a chance to live a whole life, they did their time. But we don't treat folks in that way. But what I have seen the success is with actually directly funding those services, because they are an extension of what we should be doing. And there's so many nonprofits across the states who are doing that for government. Ideally government would do it, but we need to invest in those. And the returning citizens support group, let's just shout them out. They're amazing. They're underfunded. If you guys want to donate any of your dollars to them, go it's run by returning citizens, and it's led by them, and they've been involved in policy decision making too, and they're empowered. We work with them A bunch of the advocacy groups on the ground also work with them. So like building that power, knowing they have a voice, because going through that system, you don't feel like you have a voice. So a lot of the work there is also making sure that we are taking care of our own people as they come out, and that they're treated like humans who deserve, the necessities of life and more.
Good.
I wanted to address the last question.
Just brief.
The last question, because I think that's at the heart of what we're talking about taking the equity out of BEI. You know that every agency in the state of New Jersey is required to submit a performance report at the end of the year. It's on the governor's website. But there's nothing in that report that says they have to address the equity of their performance. They have to address the efficiency of it. And so when we go back, when you ask the question about how do we change procurement, well, here we don't even have agencies that have to say who's being impacted by their services. So if we have a governor that's there and says, when you submit as an agency, when you submit your report, you have to talk about who's getting the services. And so I think it goes back to budgeting too. You have to have a chief executive who says, equity is important to me. And if this doesn't happen, I don't see how things are going to change.
Yes.
Ask those
Jump
tough
in.
questions, like affordable for who? When
Exactly.
you hear these
Right.
buzzwords,
And
who is this gonna serve?
And who's getting the money and who's paying for it?
Exactly.
Go ahead.
These are long, you can't just give short, brief answers. We have to be about it. We gotta we stand on the shoulders of Ella Baker, of Fannie Lou Hamer, of all these greats. That equity wasn't a thing, they were fighting for that. So it has an ebb and a flow. It'll come, it'll go, depending on who's in positions of authority. But it's how, I think the second question, how we show up on the street, how we show up in practice, how when I walk down the street, my mind says, oh shit, things are, oh wow, we're not using that same, things are actually changing. How do we build wealth, shared equity in communities, not just, I want to be an individual and flip a house and sell it for $3 million. It has to show up on the block. If it doesn't show up when you're seated on that stoop and you watch who shows up, if it doesn't happen there, it can never percolate up and go anywhere. So returning citizens, we never even called that growing. I don't even know, just come home. That's what it was, right? Now it's like all these acronyms and hierarchy and the budget here, budget there. It just creates more divide when people should just come home. They made a mistake, so let's deal with it. Let's welcome them home. We have a lot of work to do, and it has to show up. And look at your block, as Nicole said. When they say affordable housing, who?
Yep.
When they say a renter, do you want to keep renting when you can own a home? So, thank you all.
Go ahead, brother. Good. I come you good. I want to thank all of y'all for being here. Take care.